Welcome to the Venly Expert Talks, where we aim to inspire Web3 builders with great stories from great minds. I'm your host, Alexandra Ahrens, and I'd like to remind you that you can always reach out to us on Twitter, Discord, or LinkedIn with ideas for the podcast and questions for our guests. Welcome to episode 41 of the Venly Expert Talks. Today I'm joined by Keir Finlow-Bates, and we are going to talk about a little bit about tokenomics, play-to-earn games, NFTs, and blockchain as a whole. So thank you very much for joining me today, Keir.
Well, thank you, Alex.
So if we could start out, I am very interested in this online persona you've built for yourself. So if you could just tell me kind of all your backstory, so where you're from, how you got into the space, and we'll go from there.
Right. I won't go through the whole of my history because that would take too long, but I'm currently in Finland. Back in 2010, I read Nakamoto's white paper on Bitcoin and found the technical concepts fascinating. Didn't buy any Bitcoin at that point, which is why I'm still working rather than living on a tropical island somewhere. Probably would be feeling bored if I'd gone that route, though. And then in 2015, the company I worked for laid off the entire Finland workforce. It was a multinational company. And I had a choice to make, which is go and continue looking for work as a test manager and test engineer, which is what I'd done for 20 years, or go full-time blockchain. And that's what I did. And then I realized running my own company that you actually have to advertise in order to get customers and get work. It's a shock to an engineer because you think it'll just happen. Yeah. So I started building an online brand mainly on LinkedIn, and in usual sort of mathematician and engineering and test engineering manner, I did this through testing, trying things out. And along the way, I've picked up this hashtag and this nickname, Blockchain Gandalf. I think it was Anthony Day on LinkedIn who originally suggested it. I resisted it for 2 months, but on the whole, it's actually served me pretty well. And so now I just kind of post about topics in blockchain that I'm interested in, current affairs things, technical things, a bit of humor, a bit of quirky information here and there, because I like things to be fun. And that's the thing about blockchain is it's been the most enjoyable area to work in I've ever had the pleasure to be involved in. And I've worked in things like satellite navigation software and stuff like security. So, but blockchain is better than even those. Okay. Can you tell me why you feel that way? I think it's because if you're like me and if you're the kind of person who goes to read a Wikipedia article on something you want to learn about, and 4 hours later you look at the clock and go, oh my goodness, what's happened to the time? Why do I know so much about all these other topics that have nothing to do with what I went to read about? You just keep clicking links. Then blockchain offers all that kind of stuff. It's at its core, it's a technology, and it uses a lot of different parts from mathematics and computer science. So you've got peer-to-peer networks and cryptography, but then it pulls in stuff from economics. So it's you've got a lot of sort of economics applications that it can be used for. And then there's things like sociology and philosophy that come in too. It makes you query. As you investigate blockchain, you'll start to ask yourself questions about what is money, what is value, what is involved in human beings interacting with each other. So that's what I like about it. Is it just keeps giving. The more you explore, the more you realize that there's a lot of stuff you've been taking for granted, and it makes you question that. So I guess ultimately it turns computer science and economics into philosophy.
Wow. Okay. Wow. Getting deep already. So you said that you kind of had your own business and you've done a lot of things. I also had a peek at your LinkedIn. I know that you're currently working a lot of things as well. Can you tell us about some of them, or maybe your favorites, or right, and what your goals are with those?
You've asked me what my favorite is. So I have to mention the Authorverse, which it started off at the beginning of this year as an NFT project. So I found a quirk in the way that token contracts are written that meant that I could give every single Ethereum address a token. And actually, initially, I gave everybody 100 ERC20 tokens. Then I ended up working with of all people, a Corsican programmer living in Thailand. And we've become very good friends over the last 9 months because of this collaboration, although I've never met him in person, where we issued one NFT to every single Ethereum address. And just to put this in context, there are as many Ethereum addresses. Well, the magnitude is about the same as the number of atoms in the Earth. So if you were told, find a grain of sand that got stuck between your toes when you were on a beach 10 years ago, and you think, no, there's no way I can do that. That is much, much easier than finding a particular atom in the planet Earth. I mean, that would be trivial compared to finding a particular atom. And there are that many Ethereum addresses. And yet each and every one of them has an Authorverse token. Then we expanded that out. I used some generative art code to create a different image for each token. So again, a lot of potential images out there. Most of them will never be seen, of course, because nobody can look at that number of tokens, but they can theoretically be created. So that's a fun application of combinatorics. Then land in the metaverse started becoming hot. Or rather, it had been getting hot. Now it's seeing a bit of a tail off as people are realizing that companies like Sandbox and Decentraland aren't really delivering something that people want. And of course, the big company suffering at the moment is Meta, formerly known as Facebook. So, they've hemorrhaged, is it $15 billion now to produce cartoon-like representations of Mark Zuckerberg with no legs. So, I don't know why he wants this, but I mean, he's a billionaire. They're a bit quirky. So, maybe it'd be better if he decided to also try and go and live on Mars with the other billionaires. But that's the choice he made, to go inward rather than outward and halve his body. But so we looked at. I got distracted there. So we made. So we came up with this idea of using images of land. And at that point, I started realizing that people have this very different understanding of what the metaverse should be about to what I have, which is they're really focused on the visual aspect of it. Whenever people say metaverse, everybody else on the planet seems to immediately think augmented reality or virtual reality and headsets and 3D and they talk about it being immersive, which is another thing that I find peculiar because I don't know about you, but if I read a book and it's a good book, within half a minute, I'm immersed. If I'm reading a good book, I forget that I am there. That I forget about my body. I forget about my location. I'm in the book. That's immersive, and it doesn't involve any goggles. It doesn't have any pictures. It's just words, right? But so why there's this idea that it has to be VR goggles on your head, and why they're throwing all this money at making lightweight ones, and from what I can tell, repeating the mistakes of Google Glass in that respect, that people don't really care, and they're going after that as the way of achieving immersiveness. I have a few theories. One possible one is that Mark Zuckerberg suffers from aphantasia, an inability to visualize things in his mind, which is an unfortunate condition that some people have. And that, if I ask you to close your eyes and picture an apple, and you do that, you can probably get some kind of feeling that you are looking at an apple. Some people will see fantastic detail, beads of condensation, subtleties of shading. Other people will just have an amorphous apple shape. Some people can genuinely not even picture a circle in their mind. So I'm wondering if, and those people benefit from virtual reality, that actually having a headset and being able to see stuff that they would want to visualize, it's useful for them. But for most of us, we are fortunate enough to be able to have a mind's eye. And so maybe it's less important to us. But as I said, that's just a theory. I'm not saying he actually does.
Yeah, of course. Okay.
Right.
And so, you said you had a couple of theories. Are there any other major theories that stand out to you as to why that seems to be the way we're going?
Well, the second one is just that it's the easiest thing to grab onto. So if you look at Neil Stephenson's book, Snow Crash, he mentions that's where the metaverse is introduced. And it's this virtual three-dimensional world that people enter. They don't wear headsets. They have computers that beam lasers into their eyes and actually draw the images on the back of the retina, which I personally would feel a bit squeamish about. I hope I never have to have eye surgery because I don't like things going near my eyes like that, or inside them. But the thing is that Stephenson wrote about a virtual world that you could enter through the aid of computers and optics that was three-dimensional and photorealistic because he's writing a story, right? And maybe he was even thinking about possible movie rights later on. So if you're writing a story, you provide a description of the scene usually. So you open a book, you'll see descriptions of trees and houses and streets, rooms, what furniture they have. The writers want to build a picture in your mind. And so plus probably in 1992 when he wrote it, that seemed really cool. But for the technologists who are trying to now make this a reality, they kind of pick on that aspect and they ignore all the other stuff he wrote about. There's the whole aspect of the economy of that internal world. So in Snow Crash, he talks, the main character, hero protagonist, owns a piece of land very close to the center of the metaverse. So it's like having a plot of land in Soho, London, or so somewhere in the center. The hero protagonist is incredibly wealthy in that respect inside the metaverse, but he's living in a storage locker in the real world with a with a rather odd musician, I think, if I remember rightly. But anyway, so there's this kind of juxtaposition, which again is part of writing a novel. You want to sort of have some internal tensions. And again, it's just those kind of things get overlooked for the thing that you can kind of demonstrate immediately. And I guess this is part of the problem with the metaverse is people are much quicker to have a concept that they understand something if it's presented to them visually than if you have to explain some kind of mechanics that are going on underneath. So explaining a virtual world economy is much harder than saying to people, put this headset on. Anyone who's pitched to a VC will know this, right? You have your PowerPoint presentation, and you've got a mock-up of what the interface to your program is going to look like. And some people look at it and think, oh, well, they've done it, And you're kind of like, no, I just drag some squares around in Draw and label them. There's masses of back-end stuff that we have to code up. It's a little bit, it can't be much. I can see it. So I think it's a matter of that kind of stuff coming back to bite us.
Okay, that makes sense. So I guess if I could follow through on that, if you were given all the money you could require, all the man hours, the greatest minds on your team, what would your version of the metaverse look like if you could build it? Or act like, or...
So I think you've hit on what the real problem is here, which is that the metaverse, from what I take away from it, is about interoperability and community and a shared experience. And if you look at your question, you've done the equivalent of saying, if you had all the money, what movie would you make? And if you're making a movie, you get a script writer to write a script. You're the director. You're going to say where people are going to stand, what they're going to say, how it's going to look like, what the feel of it is going to be. But it's your vision as the director. When you go and watch Star Wars, you're seeing George Lucas's vision of a sci-fi world in another galaxy. If you go to see a Quentin Tarantino movie, you're getting his take on, would it be cool to have 70s retro stuff and lots of violence with some witty dialogue in between? So you're kind of picking a different director's viewpoint of the world. So the issue there is that if you gave me all the money and said, what will my metaverse be? Well, it would be me probably putting out masses of grants to different, groups to start working on this.
That's a fair answer.
Yeah. I certainly wouldn't want to make the meta mistake of thinking that I could be the director of the movie entitled Metaverse, because that's just not going to fly. So hand it out.
Okay. Yeah.
So great. You've just asked me what would I do if I got a lot of money. My answer was I'd give it away.
And therein goes back to the, if you had Bitcoin at the beginning, wouldn't have made a difference, I guess.
Probably not.
Okay. Well, no, it's a very interesting answer. Based on that, can I ask, do you consider yourself a degen?
I keep looking up what the definition of a degen is, and I'm not really sure I fully grasp it, but do you need to understand what a degen is in order to actually know what one is? In order to be one? What do you think a degen is? Define a degen and I'll tell you whether I am one or not.
Oh boy, no, I don't want to get anybody in trouble, myself included. But I guess, would you consider yourself kind of a Web3 native, and you're, in every sense of the term, in trying to keep Web3 and the decentralized aspect as pure as possible, maybe?
Right. On a basic level, I have a bunch of NFTs in various wallets and a bunch of different cryptocurrencies. Not vast hordes of them, but substantially more than the average person on the planet, who has zero. So there's that aspect.
Sure.
As for decentralization, I think when we talk about decentralization, we're missing the focus, which is, to me, the important thing is censorship resistance. Decentralization is a means to an end and not an end in itself. Otherwise, it's sort of, when people kind of go decentralization maximalist, then they start sounding like that tongue-in-cheek quote from Lemmy from Motorhead, where he said every instrument louder than every other instrument is the Motorhead sound. And so it's kind of like when they get obsessed, so everything must be everywhere else. It's got to be so decentralized that you sort of think, well, what is this going to achieve? Decentralization is a mechanism whereby you can stop the abuse of centralized power, but the abuses that you're trying to stop are boiled down to censorship. So in that sense, it's a mechanism for reducing the amount of censorship. And by censorship, I'm not just talking about libraries in South Carolina not allowing To Kill a Mockingbird to be put on the shelf or something like that. I'm talking about things like you not being allowed to spend your own money in your bank account because you don't actually own it. The bank does. And I had a personal experience of this. I was on holiday in Egypt, and my bank decided that my card had been stolen. And therefore, on the first week of my holiday, I couldn't get any money out. And I was frantically on the phone. And nobody wants to spend their first day of their holiday on the phone to their bank manager. Well, not my bank manager, a person at the call center, because we no longer have bank managers, trying to get access to their own money. Now, the bank does this to protect you, but sometimes they go too far. And in fact, they have gone too far in cases where banks have actually said, you cannot spend money on these things. We're going to censor you from. So they had some banks refuse to honor credit card transactions to buy cryptocurrency. Similarly, people who are working in the cannabis industry or the adult entertainment industry, let's call it that, find it very hard to get bank accounts. They may be doing something that is completely legal in the state that they are living in, but because it has what some people consider an unsavory aspect to it, they find it difficult to get access to financial services. And this is in the banked section of the world. We haven't even touched on people who are living in countries where banking services are virtually non-existent. So the thing about decentralization is it's a mechanism that can help you overcome these kind of this censorship. It does have a flip side, which is, of course, that it enables things that some societies would not like to have happen. But in general, I tend to fall on the side of less censorship rather than more, because we tend to go too far over into the too much censorship side of things.
Okay. Yeah, makes sense. So is that kind of what your ideal Web3 landscape would look like, is minimal censorship, but maybe it's still there, and more access, mainly?
Well, it's a hard one, isn't it? Because I don't want Web3 to end up being one huge, massive sort of free-for-all. Anybody can say anything about anyone. I mean, what's the site? 4chan, I think, is,
Right.
You wouldn't want it to be a massive version of that. But on the other hand, maybe people should have the right to gather in their own spaces to express themselves the way they see fit. And so if you're not happy with a particular aspect, you just don't go there. It's hard because there are some things that we do legislate. In general, I'm all for you being able to say what you want to say, think what you want to think. But we do have legislation to say, well, these are the limits that we as a society as a whole have drawn up, and you have to abide by them, and then people push against them. So I'm not hit by that problem of having to push against them so much, because I lead a fairly conventional life, but I do recognize that other people suffer. So it's a difficult question. We haven't solved it in the real world. I'm not sure that the virtual world will solve it more, other than giving you the opportunity to connect up with like-minded people in an easier manner, which is what the internet did, right? In the 1980s, you'd be sitting in your bedroom as a teenager wondering, am I just weird for feeling this way? Now you can go on Google and say, no, there's thousands of other people out there who feel the same way as me, and they even have a bulletin board and a logo and a name for themselves and stuff. And so I think that's a good thing. I think a lot of misery that kids had in the 80s is gone, to be replaced by a whole other load of problems associated with the fact that now there's all this sort of influencer public, I think role models is the wrong word to use for them, but basically they're presented with potential role models that are unattainable and we're photoshopping the way they appear. But maybe the metaverse and Web3 will solve that, in that anybody can have their own avatar, so you can all look the way that you want to. Maybe looks will become less important because of it. Who knows? But that kind of stuff's way off in the future.
Sure. How intertwined would you say tokenomics or the economy in general, I guess, is intertwined with what Web3 is or will be?
Well, I think the interesting thing about token economies is the fact that I was thinking about this the other day. So in the real world, we have our standard economies, standard financial systems. We have currencies dictated to us by central banks with the blessing of governments. And we're kind of stuck with what there is there. And you or I cannot have any real influence on how these things work. We experience the economy in the same way that we experience a movie. We just have to live through it and hope that it's a good one. Whereas what Web3 economies offer is the opportunity for us to actually create our own So now we're moving away from being presented with a movie to actually being told, well, here's Minecraft or here's Roblox, but you can go and build your own stuff within it. So you've got a framework that you have to operate in. But within that framework, you can start experimenting and trying stuff out. So, yeah, I think the underlying blockchain-based economy aspect of Web3 is highly important for it. And I think it's something that offers us a great opportunity to experiment with economics in a way that has never previously been possible. And therefore, I'm surprised that universities and governments aren't throwing resources at it, because here you have a sandbox where you can actually try out fiscal policy without accidentally plunging 100,000 people into starvation or homelessness. But they seem to mostly be wanting it to either go away or saying that it's terrible. That's always a good indicator that something is actually potentially very, very fruitful. It's when the incumbents say that it's a bad idea. Yeah.
Fair enough. Okay. You said that there's things that you think should be tested out or could be tested out within these token economies. Do you have specific ideas?
Not anything that I can talk about at the moment. I'm looking into a few things, but I have to work them through, and they may actually have value associated with them. So I'm not going to blurt them all out at this point. I give a fair amount of stuff away.
Fair enough.
In LinkedIn. I can't show all the ways that all my magic tricks are done. I have to keep a few of them back for future shows. So at the moment, it's interesting to me at the moment watching how various economies are initially succeeding and then failing. And the other one is studying the signs of non-sustainability within token economies. So you have this, we have a couple of problems. We've got hundreds of problems in the DeFi and crypto space. But one particular one is there's an awful lot of scams, but there's an awful lot of people who are sincere, but what they are producing has the same structure as a scam if they're not careful. So there's intentional scams, and those are bad, and boo, get rid of them, we don't like them. There's also a bunch of projects that look like the underlying idea is good, but the implementation is copying the same structures over and over again, and they result in eventual collapse because their whole economy is built on more people coming in and buying it, and it becomes akin to a pyramid scheme. If you can't keep piling those tiers on underneath, feeding more in, then it eventually collapses. Plus, the money is just moving up the pyramid, so the people at the top are doing very well. And I think some projects inadvertently, just because they're copying what has gone before, fall into these traps. And so the question is, how can you build economies for token projects that don't experience massive booms and collapses, but actually grow in a sensible, sustainable manner? And of course, economies have the same problem. And we haven't solved that in the real world. We still go through cycles of boom and bust and massive financial collapse and bailouts. And we seem to have to hit the reset button every 10 to 15 years in our economies. So there's something wrong there. And you kind of wonder how many times does that button have to be hit before they actually think of perhaps fixing it. But with token economies, yeah, I think people are sort of chipping away at individual problems within them, trying to solve them. And as I said, I can't talk about the specifics of what I'm working on at the moment. But you could just go and look at any token-backed project and look at their tokenomics papers, and you can start seeing, okay, this is where they've taken this from. This is where they're taking that from. You can start questioning each line you see in it. Why have they made that decision? Part of the problem is that sometimes the only reason they made that decision is because they copy-pasted from a previous project. But if they actually provide some justifications for why they made the decisions, you can learn a lot. And until it's tested, you can't even be sure whether what they're saying makes sense or not. So you may see something, you may disagree with it, But then if the project succeeds, then it was the right decision. And similarly, something may look great on paper, and then it all goes horribly wrong. But that's common in economics. We just saw that with the recently ousted Chancellor of the Exchequer in the UK, Kwasi Kwarteng, by all accounts, a brilliant guy, and one of the shortest serving chancellors of the Exchequer that we've had. So all his brains didn't matter because the markets don't care about brains. They care about a whole bunch of other things as well.
Yeah. Well, yeah, the UK is a whole different issue, I guess, right now.
Well,
but
I don't live there anymore, so I can kind of look in from the sidelines with amusement. But it's not pretty. But that's just my personal opinion. Everybody else out there is entitled to their own one. So don't get upset.
Of course. No. So in your answer there, you kind of pointed out that there are obviously some that are building these token economies as a scam, but then there are some that are definitely trying to build something good. Is there anything or any tips that you could give on how to maybe build in fail safes or how to check your work when building these economies?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing is don't just go to another project and look at the table of numbers that they've provided and copy paste it into your own white paper and then tweak some of the numbers to make it not obvious that you copied it. Because it sort of becomes a bit of a Chinese whispers exercise in that case, where each, I don't know why that game is called that. It's probably not allowed to call it that anymore.
I don't know. We call it the telephone game now.
The telephone, that's a much better name for it. There's no need to pick on 1 billion people on the planet. Yeah, we'll go with that. So apologies to the telephone game. Good name. Especially if you had used telephones in the 70s or 80s, because they were awful. Now they're pretty clear. But anyway, I get sidetracked so easily, don't I? Yeah. So then you end up with these projects that are copied projects, and you and I bet people are going to have fun in the future going back and saying, oh, look, they have that number there because of these guys. And you can trace it all the way back to that individual project. And they picked the number by rolling 3 handfuls of dice and then multiplying it by 1,000. So, I remember reading some articles on why Satoshi Nakamoto picked 21 million for the cap for Bitcoin, for example. And he or she or they actually did have some reasoning behind it. So that's an interesting one. The first thing to note is that there's not 21 million Bitcoins. There's 21 million times, and what is the number of decimal places for Bitcoin off the top of my head? I think it's 10. Anyway, the unit is much, much smaller, and it's just a group of them are called a Bitcoin. And Nakamoto picked it on the understanding that eventually they were thinking in terms of dollar parity for the subunits. And then there's the second thing that the amount may get halved each time until eventually it tails off and then stops. And it's those two features that together suggested that a number like 21 million would be a good one. But it could have been 42. It could have been, 10.5 million. Maybe 100 billion would have been too much, and maybe 3 would have been too little. And you see that in the projects where they just copy the numbers. And then the second thing is really look at what your token is supposed to be doing. And that's something I see missing a lot is actually, what are and there's probably going to be more than one aim for your token. It's going to be serving a purpose. It's, is it meant to accrue value over time at a rate proportional to how well the project does, which would make it an investor token? Or is it something that people are going to spend in order to gain services or items like NFTs? In which case it's going to act more like a currency and these kind of things. And sometimes the uses or the purposes of the tokens get confused or they're in conflict with each other. And that's never a good sign because, it's I'm trying to think of an analogy off the top of my head here. But it's basically, if you try to make a tool that can do everything, so it's like, I want this one tool and it's got to be able to remove screws and cut wood and open paint cans and put staples into the wall. You're going to end up with a pretty horrible thing to use, or a Swiss pocket knife. But yeah, but I don't know many people who carry around Swiss pocket knives, and it's kind of ultimately they do everything sort of not as well. I mean, a Swiss pocket knife is great if you need to do lots of different things, but I don't have 20 Swiss pocket knives in my cutlery drawer. I have knives and forks and spoons, right? So
fair enough. Yeah.
So think very carefully if your token is being a Swiss pocket knife when all you need is a spoon. And now I'm thinking of Alanis Morissette for some reason.
Is there a way that you could explain or kind of recommend that these people could test these economies before launch, ideally? But
yeah, well, you can run simulations. There's all sorts of software out there, a lot of it free, for simulating what is going on. So, I mean, it's tricky because you're trying to predict how a population is going to behave. And you can do the sort of deterministic things and make some nice charts. And you can run some Monte Carlo simulations where you say, well, let's say I've got a population of 100 million and each person is going to behave in a random certain way within parameters. What's going to happen? The problem with simulations is they're not very good at simulating the unexpected, the black swan events or the shock events. And you can't sit down and a human being has to sit down and say, well, what would happen to our economy if, and then you start proposing more and more outlandish situations, one of which might come true. Mm-hmm. So, what would happen if the treasury of the project was hacked and 80% of our funds were stolen? What would happen if, a vampire attack happened on our protocol and we lost 80% of our users overnight? Would the remaining 20 still make for a viable ecosystem, or would that cause a death spiral? What you're often looking for are the things that you're concerned about going to be negative feedback loops or positive feedback loops? Because if they're negative feedback loops, they'll stabilize themselves again. But often in these kind of things, you end up with these positive feedback loops, like a run on a bank, right? Where because people sense that the bank is going under, they go to withdraw their money. That confirms the suspicions of the others that the bank is going to go under, so they go and withdraw their money. And before you know it, the bank is surrounded by people trying to withdraw their cash, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so those are the kind of things you need to be looking out for. And but what triggers them is the difficult thing. I mean, when you look at real-world economics, in hindsight, it's always clear. Oh, yeah, they were behaving like idiots. And, I mean, people were. If you look at the 2008 financial crash, people were relying on the ratings provided by ratings agencies, to assess the viability of various financial institutions. The problem is that these ratings reports were commissioned and paid for by those very institutions. So it's sort of like saying, if you ask people to self-assess themselves, some of them are going to lie and say they're brilliant. And to be honest, the kind of people who will lie and say they're brilliant are exactly the kind of people who end up working on Wall Street. So, it's not surprising that they lied about themselves, but you only realize this stuff in hindsight.
Sure. Okay. How would you say that gaming and play-to-earn games in particular are involved in this conversation? Is that necessary? Is that good, bad? How do you see that going in the future?
Well, it's not necessary or good or bad. any more than that a game is necessary or good or bad. Well, I suppose maybe games are necessary. Human beings have played games since the beginning of time. Well, not the beginning of time, but the beginning of humanity. Anyway, I imagine that it's a kind of one of those core features of human beings, a part of how we make models of the world. When you think about it, it's not surprising. One of the abilities that we have is to imagine what the future might be like, imagine what an experience that somebody else is having might be like. And from that arises rather than making these hypotheses about the real world, I'm going to do them for entertainment. So games are necessary, I suppose, in that they arise from one of our fundamental capabilities as human beings. I made videos about blockchain and games back in 2016 or so. It seemed to me it was a natural fit. And I've just become more convinced over time that blockchain is going to become more and more important in games on the basis that it gives you ownership over digital stuff out of the control of other parties. And at the moment, I know that a lot of gamers are very skeptical about NFTs and cryptocurrencies in games. And I can understand why they feel that way, because a lot of the gaming industries have evolved to become value extraction from players. So when I first got into computer games in the 80s, they were often written by one or two, usually guys. I can't think of any female game writers who are famous from the 80s. So things do change for the better because they exist now. But they were typically written by one or two people. And those people were writing them out of love of the game. And it shows in the product that they produce. That Mike Singleton didn't write Lords of Midnight in the 80s, my favorite game from the 80s, because he wanted to become rich, or because he wanted to build a huge company, or because he wanted to scrape personal data about people. He wrote it because he loved fantasy and he liked strategy games, and the computer was a way of doing those in a new, exciting way. Now we see a lot of games companies where the focus is on doing masses of A/B testing to work out how we can get an individual player to spend 2 cents more on per hour that they play, and it's kind of the love of producing the games is pushed to the side as it becomes more and more corporate. And again, it's not unexpected. It takes large software houses, game design development companies to produce these things. And there's a lot of money in it. It's a magnitude higher than movies, which are a magnitude higher than books, music, which is a magnitude higher than books. So it's the biggest entertainment industry we have now. And so of course it's going to go that way. It's become, when there's that much money at stake, it becomes cutthroat. But the nice thing about the creative world is that occasionally something sneaks through. You know, the big movie studios spend millions and billions on making movies, and yet two guys take a camera to the woods and produce an indie hit. Same with writing, same with music, and it's the same with games. Occasionally somebody just comes up with something that you can code up in a couple of weeks, and the mechanics of the game are so good that that it just takes off. And I'm thinking of things here like, I think the most recent one I would pick on is Wordle, right? Really simple concept. You know Wordle? You got 5-letter word, and yeah. I mean, that's something that could have been written in the 80s. And yeah, it's keeping lots and lots of people enthralled. Then your question is, how do we monetize it? Right? That immediately comes in. So, so back to the original thing, and the theme of today is obviously me getting sidetracked. So I had an experience, or rather my son had an experience, where he didn't realize that his phone was set up to pay for things through the mobile subscription. It's called mobile subscription pay. And he never bought stuff until I gave him a Google Play card for €10. And he loaded it onto his phone. Mm-hmm. And then he started buying in Roblox and Clash of Clans and I can't remember the other games. There were about 4 of them. And he was amazed at how much stuff he was getting. Like, he actually came back to me 2 days later and said, "Thank you for the play card. I got to buy so much." And I was like, "Oh, I'm so happy for you." Until I saw the phone bill at the end of the month, and it was for €500, right? So we complained, and the mobile phone company refused to refund it because on page 4 of the 14 pages of terms and conditions, it said that when you get your account, mobile subscription pay is enabled, and it is up to you to disable it. And they said, go talk to Google because they run the Google Play site. I don't know why they said go talk to Google, because any interaction with Google when it comes to Google Play is through a series of a twisty maze of online forms, each one subtly different from the next, but none of them providing you with the right fields to fill in your complaint. It's like some Kafka-esque form-based nightmare. And after completing about 20 forms, I finally tried to get in touch with the software companies. And so that was Supercell, and I can't remember the company. Is it Roblox actually is the name of the company as well? And the result of that was they cancelled my son's gaming accounts. Supercell and Roblox just cancelled the accounts. Roblox gave us €1.98 refund. So thanks. And the other one just said, your son's not 13, so your account is cancelled. It's like, what? It's like, it's Peggy 3 on the game thing. That means the content is suitable for 3-year-olds, but you have to be 13 to play. They're quite happy to take your money if you're under 13, right? But if you then complain about it, it's like, well, you shouldn't have been playing it in the first place. So the thing that tops it off is that we lost all the items he bought. At least if there'd been NFTs, they would have closed our account in the game, but we could have got 2, 3, maybe €350 of the 500 back by selling it on an NFT marketplace. But they're not NFTs. They are created and destroyed at the whim of the gaming companies. And when gamers recognize that, they realize that, and enough of them have these kind of experiences, and these experiences are going to get more and more common as the financial stakes get higher and higher and regulation comes in and stuff, then gamers are going to wake up to the fact that there's these kind of injustices going along on all the time. I've seen several people on LinkedIn who've had a similar experience with their kid or with their experience in games. But we're a minority at the moment. But eventually, people will realize this is a real risk, which is something they don't think of at the moment. And that is why true ownership of the things that you buy in games is so important. In the same way that, when you buy physical, at least when you buy physical goods, you have the goods at the end of the day. With these virtual items, kids today get amazingly attached to them. I have a whole bunch of kids myself, and they've been very educational and making me understand that to them, these virtual things in the games are a virtual skin in Fortnite is just as important to my 6-year-old as a figurine of that same character in that he's got on his shelf. They're equally important. He doesn't care that one is something he can hold and the other one is a digital representation on a TV screen. Identical as far as he's concerned in level of importance. But the company can't take away his plastic doll, but it can take away his digital skin. And that's what I would like to see change, that he'll have that.
No, that makes complete sense. I mean, this definitely makes sense in kind of the pay-to-play sort of situation, or
because you buy items
the free-to-play, but then you have to...
because free-to-play is never free. Right? That's
right.
You end up buying... The aim is that you will buy stuff. And the fact is you are putting time in. So if you have managed, it's it's not just the money. You may have put 100 euros into the game over half a year, but you may have put 1,000 hours. And if you spend 1,000 hours trying to put together a 10,000 or 100,000 piece jigsaw puzzle, and just before you completed it, someone tips over the table, you're upset. And in these free-to-play games, it's the same kind of thing, that you could wake up one day and find that the 1,000 hours you put into your game are lost because your account is, and it doesn't matter that you haven't paid money. You've put your life into it. And
Sure.
For some people out there, these things are a kind of life.
Mm-hmm. How do you feel about the play to earn, learn to earn, run to earn, whatever, those kind of games and economies?
Well, I think it's an interesting idea, and one that's been implemented, obviously, in some cases. I'm guessing that the people who designed these games were not thinking in terms of swathes of people in the Philippines switching to playing them to make a living. And the press has made a big deal about this, that, what have we created? People are playing knockoff versions of Pokemon games in order to make a living. And my initial gut feel to that is, this is terrible. But then I thought a bit more and thought, well, most of what most people do for a living is pretty pointless. There's very few people who are doing jobs that actually are of any real significance. So teachers and doctors and nurses clearly are doing something of great value. But having worked in a lot of large technology corporations, I saw a lot of people, and occasionally I was among them, who were just turning up and going through the motion to collect our paycheck. And you would look back at the end of the month and you'd say, well, that was a waste of time. And as early as the late 90s, I remember, where there were 10 of us working on a project, and we all knew from day one when we assigned it that it was going to get canned. And the question was, is it going to get canned in 6 months or 18 months or 36? But it's going to happen. And you turn up and they write the code and you test the code, and we set up the computer hardware for doing so. And lo and behold, 12 months later, management says, no, this project is not going to fly. It's cancelled, right? So weren't we doing the same as those people in the Philippines playing play to earn, admittedly for probably 100 or 1,000 times as much money as they were earning? But I think a lot of what people are doing in their lives is they have to go through these motions. So the question is, can we guide these things so that they don't cause us to fall into this hamster wheel trap? And can we learn something from the play to earn games to help us avoid creating hamster wheel traps in real life? Because the learning isn't just one way. It's not just real life informing virtual worlds. Virtual worlds should eventually inform us of better ways to do stuff in the real world.
I like it. Yeah. Okay. Unfortunately, I feel like we should probably start wrapping up, but I've greatly enjoyed this conversation. I do want to give you the opportunity here to put in a plug if there's anything that you want to shout out.
Oh, I think I'm going to bend down here and get up here. Given that opportunity, how can I turn it down? I have a book. This is the Italian version. I don't know why I picked that one up. So anybody who's Italian, Scansatevi broca serviva la blockchain. It's a really good translation written by an Italian friend of mine. And please excuse my Italian accent. And then there's the English version. Move over, brokers. Here comes the blockchain. It's a 321-page book on blockchain, covers everything from the fundamentals to some really interesting and useful stuff in the more technical areas. But it's readable by non-technical people because it uses analogies to explain things in understandable manners. And people tell me that it's quite amusing in places as well. So it's also entertaining. It's got everything. Uses an analogy between punk music from the 70s and blockchain to compare industries where people took power away from the incumbents in the industry, and then the industry took it back. Because punk music and things like Bitcoin and Ethereum have a surprising amount in common. So buy that book and find out why.
I like it. Yeah, I'm definitely going to check it out. I've definitely enjoyed all of your analogies you've given me today, so I'm sure that will be great fun.
I actually thought about the ones in the book rather than making them up on the spot, so they're even better in the book.
Good. Then, very last question, who should we have on the Expert Talks next? I will say that I do already have Anthony Day booked.
Okay. Have you considered Maurizio Magaldi?
I haven't, but I'm happy to.
He works for 11FS. He's a Brazilian guy, and he's a drummer and a huge Lord of the Rings fan. And he's also really amusing and witty and very insightful about stuff. Plus, he's got a delightfully dry sense of humor. So I would suggest him.
Wonderful. Then, yeah, I'll definitely reach out to him. I am a little disappointed in myself that I didn't get some more Lord of the Rings references in here today.
It should always be Lord of the Rings. Yeah. I'll tell you something, though. If you read Lord of the Rings, you'll see that the characters within it never actually talk about the book, right? So in that sense, we're being true to the nature of the book, in that we're inside it, and therefore we're not breaking the fourth wall and talking about it. It's not that kind of book. So.
Very true. Very true. Good. Thank you again so much. I really, really appreciate your time. It's been an awesome conversation.
Thank you, Alex.
If you like today's episode, please rate, follow, or subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on. And if you really like our content, join our Discord community, where there's always good conversation, exciting news, and live AMAs. Thanks for listening.